So, welcome back to our video discussion. We are now in the final part of Unit 2 and we are in a final lesson, which is the lesson 7, the global governance. So, to proceed to our last lesson, let me share to you the lesson objectives for today. At the end of this lesson, you should able to identify the challenges of global governance in the 21st century. We should able to identify the roles and functions of United Nations. Sorry, kulang lang ng N yun. And number 3, we should able to explain the effects of globalization to government. So, let's proceed to our first topic. So, global governance. When you say global governance, from the word itself, governance, from the root words govern, is how you should able to handle, how should the world should be um, administered, or paano ba pamumunuan yung mundo, yung paano ba pamumunuan yung iba't ibang bansa sa buong mundo, the countries all around the world. So with that, let us first identify the introductory statement. Although many internationalists like Bentham and Kant imagine the possibility of global government, nothing of the sort exists today. So, kahit dun sa previous lesson natin na sinabi nila na in order to have a smooth international relation, dapat may global governance. But until now, wala pa rin global government na nag-exist today. There is no one organization that various states are accountable to. There is, however, some regularity in the general behavior states. So, may organizations man, but doesn't mean na ito talaga yung nag-govern sa mga bansa. But it's that regulating the behavior of different country about the world in terms of their relationship to other countries. Global governance refers to the various intersecting processes that create disorder. International non-government organization, though not having a formal state power, can levy individual states to behave in a certain way. For example, International Animal Protection is a non-government organization can pressure governments to pass an animal cruelty law. Ibig sabihin, yung global governance is nagagawa lang or shoulder ng mga international organizations or ng mga non-government non-government organizations, like for example nga yung International Animal Protections, na they pressure the governments to pass an animal cruelty law to prevent animal cruelty. So in that sense, we can say that there is no such things as global government, but there are such organizations or institutions that govern or regulate the activities and the behavior of different member nations or different countries around the world. One lesson will not able to cover the various ways global governance occurs. As such, this lesson will only examine how global governance is articulated by intergovernmental organizations. It will focus primarily on the United Nations as the most prominent intergovernmental organization. So, in this lesson, in this chapter, or in this topic, pag-aaralan natin na kung paano ba nagkakaroon ng order, ng peace and stability yung iba't ibang bansa to settle their disputes and disagreements, and how these intergovernmental organizations helps in focusing and primarily in examining the behaviors of different countries. So, global governance in the 21st century. A call for global governance. What are the causes of call for global governance? First, declining power of nation states. There are several nation states that's their power, their sovereignty are declining. Kaya kailangan ng global governance. The vast flow of all sorts of things that run into and often right through the borders of the nation states. Marami na mga pumapasok and lumalabas in other countries na wala nang control mismo yung specific country. Mass migration of people and their entry often illegally into various nation states. During our time, marami na rin nakakapasok at nakakalabas sa iba't ibang bansa kahit illegal. So, gaya ng mga walang pasaporte, nag-expire ang mga passports, that's illegal. So, a call for global governance is because of that reason. And however, and the final reason is the horrendous events within nation state that the states themselves either foment or carry out or unable to control. So, may mga states na hindi na talaga nila kayang pamunuan yung kanilang mga countries. That's why there's a call for a global governance. So, what are the international organizations or intergovernmental organizations that govern international relations? We have a system that might be called global governance without global government. Kasi nga, there is no such things as global government. But we have a global governance. Government, when you say governance, it's the process of governing the different countries around the world. But when we say global government, it's a formal body or a formal institution that will govern. But in our case, we only have global governance, but we don't have global government. Which of one of few institutions is the World Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organization, and a few players, the Finance, Commerce, and the Trade Ministry, closely linked to a certain financial commercial interest dominate the scene, but in which many of those affected their decision are left almost voiceless. Yeah, there's a need talaga. There's a strong need in a global governance in order to hear the voice of other countries para naman mabigyan ng pagkakataon yung ibang countries within their country na matulungan sila sa pag-facilitate their own country. Kaya nagkakaroon ng global governance. But in a true sense, wala talagang global government. Global governance lang tayo meron. And that global governance is provided by different international organizations and different intergovernmental organizations. What is an international organization? International organization, when scholars refers to a group like the United Nations or the institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, they usually call them international organizations. Although international non-government organizations are sometimes considered as international organization, the term is commonly used to refer to international intergovernmental organization or groups that are primarily made up of member states. So, masasabi lang daw natin na international governmental organization or international organization ng isang institution if these are primarily made up of different member states or different countries around the world. So, these international organizations can thus become influential as independent organizations. International relations scholar Michael and Barnett and Martha Finmore listed the following powers of the IO. So, bakit sinabi nga na influential itong mga international government organizations na ito? Like dun sa example natin before, the organization from animal protection, they urge different country to pass itong animal institution for animal protection is, for example, is an international organization, and they urge all the countries around the world to pass different animal cruelty law. So ito namang mga bansa mapipilitan silang mag-pass ng mga animal cruelty laws or acts kasi nga in a global perspective bawal saktan ng mga hayop. So in that sense, makikita natin yung pagiging influential, so, either influential or pagiging powerful nito mga international organizations. Kahit na sabihin natin independent organizations lang sila, they have the power to, or they have the power para mapasund itong mga mga member states or yung mga countries around the world. In that sense, makikita natin yung governance and nagiging global governance siya kasi hindi lang iisang bansa yung sumusunod bagkos lahat ng bansa sa buong mundo. So, to be back to our topic, these are the the following powers of international organization. IOS or the international organizations have the power of classification. So, why do we say that they have the power of classification? Because they have the skills to invent and apply categories. They also have the skills to create powerful global standards. So, since sila international organization, so they are global. So, ay globalized. Kilala sila or alam sila ng buong bansa sa iba't ibang panig ng mundo. So, they have the ability to invent, apply different categories, and they have the ability to create a powerful global standards na ifa-follow na lahat ng mga bansa. So, in that sense, makikita natin may governance na, may sinusunod na yung bawat bansa sa buong mundo. So, another power is has the power to fix meanings. When we say that the international organizations has the power to fix meaning, this is a broader function related to the first various term like security and development. In defining these two terms, it needs to be well defined. State organization and individual views of international organizations legitimate source of example. As such, the meaning they create have effects on various policies. Ibig sabihin, kapag ang international organization nag-define ng mga words like security, freedom, yung kanilang mga meanings is very reliable and very legitimate to become a source of example na pwedeng gayahin nitong mga bansa o ng iba't ibang bansa sa buong mundo at doon i-pattern yung kanilang gagawing definition sa ginawa ng mga international organization. In that aspects, pag ginaya ito ng mga bansa sa buong mundo, magkakaroon nito ng epekto kasi hindi lang yung kanilang ginawang meaning or ginayang meaning is nakapattern to a global standards. Hindi lang siya sa pangsay, but global standards. And that makes the global governance kasi andun yung epekto nung ginawa ng international organizations kahit hindi directly, pero ina-adapt ito ng mga iba't ibang bansa sa buong mundo. And lastly, international organization has the power to diffuse the norms. When we say norms, they are the accepted codes of conduct that may not be strict to the law, but nevertheless produce regularity in behavior. International organizations also spread ideas across the world, thereby establishing global standards. So, itong mga norms, yan yung mga accepted acts or accepted ways of acting, ways of behavior na ginagawa ng international organizations na in a global perspective, ginagawa nilang global standards. So, to summarize, all these powers of international organizations has the power to affect and to influence the system of government, system of rules and regulations of different countries around the world. As we can see, as they adopt the global standard that um, established by the international government organizations, in that way, we can see that there is an international global governance. So, all in all, we can say that international organizations are very powerful and influential. Because of their immense power, international organization can be sources of great good and great harm. They can promote relevant norms like environmental protection and human rights, but like other bureaucracies, they can become the shield of communities that fail to challenge their beliefs. So, ganyan ka-powerful yung mga international organizations. Kaya, sila talaga yung source ng global governance. So, to clearly understand or to really deepen your understanding on a global governance, let's take a concrete example of this international organization. And one of the example of international organization is the United Nations. The United Nation itself. Okay. Having examined the powers, limitations, and weaknesses of international organization, the spotlight will now fall on the most prominent international organization in the contemporary world, the United Nations. The result was the creation of the United Nations, although the organization is far, is far from perfect. Its primary goal of averting global war, for this reason alone, the UN should be considered as success. So ito pong United Nations na ito is na established after the collapse of the League of Nations and at the end of the World War II. Yung yung iba't ibang countries kasi around the world, nagkaroon sila ng nag-worried sila na baka magkaroon pa ng isang pandaigdigang digmaan. So they decide to create an international league na talaga na magkakaroon ng cooperation, magkakaroon ng mutual benefits, and good international relations ang iba't ibang bansa. So with that, na-create itong United Nations. So, to clearly understand the United Nations, let us learn more about it. So, the United Nations has 6 principal organs: the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, and the International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat. So, in this point, we're going to discuss only the General Assembly and the Security Council as if they had a major responsibilities in in regulating the United Nations. So first, let us discuss the purpose of the United Nations. The United Nations has 4 main purposes. First is to keep peace throughout the world, to develop friendly relations among nations, to help nations work together to improve the lives of poor people, to conquer hunger, disease, and illiteracy, and to encourage respect for each other's rights and freedoms. So, and to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations to achieve this goal. So, as we can see, the main purpose of United Nations is very ideal because it aims a cooperation, a unity, a good relationship among nations around the world. It's very ideal, and that's why talagang talagang yung collective efforts ng mga tao or ng mga leaders during that time para talaga ma-establish itong United Nations. So, let us move on. So the General Assembly as the first principal organs of the United Nations. The General Assembly is the UN's main deliberate policy making and representative organ. According to the UN Charter, decisions on important questions such as those on peace and security, admission of new member state, and budgetary matters require a two-thirds majority of General Assembly. Decision on the other questions are done by simply majority. The Philippines played a prominent role in the General Assembly's early years when Filipino diplomat Carlos P. Romulo was elected GA President. So, dito sa General Assembly, dito ginagawa yung pag-uusap ng mga disputes, ng mga disagreements between other countries, lalo na sa pagdating sa peace and security concerns. Diyan din yung sa mga budgetary and pag pag pagtanggap ng mga new members diyan sa General Assembly po 'yon. And sa General Assembly, para mag-grant ang decisions, kailangan ng two-third majority of the General Assembly's vote. So after the General Assembly is the Security Council. Although the General Assembly is the most representative organization in the UN, many commentators considered for the many commentators, Security Council is considered as to be most powerful according to the UN. This body consists of 15 member states. So, itong 15 member state nito, yung General Assembly elects the 10 of these states, and for a two-year terms, nag-elect yung mga 10 member state um, of this body is, 'di ba 15 sila? 15 member state ang nasa Security Council. Yung 10 dyan sa member state na yan is nai-elect siya for 2 years terms. But other five, yung other five states are considered as the P5 or the permanent five. And these countries are China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, and United States. So, this state, itong limang to, ay sila yung mga permanent members since the founding of the United Nations and cannot be replaced through election. So, ito lang yung 10 other member state, sila yung pwedeng palitan every 2 years or every 2 terms o 2 years term. So, itong councils dito nangyayari yung dito rin nagkakaroon din ng settlement between peaceful settlement between disputes and other method of adjustment of terms of settlements. In some cases, it can resort to imposing sanctions or even authorizing the use of force to maintain and restore international peace and security. So, sila po yan, as if yung name nila is Security Council, so they are more on focus on security and peace or international peace and security. So, right now, pag-aralan naman natin kung anong epekto ng globalization sa government. Ano ba yung effects ng globalization sa iba't ibang government system ng bawat bansa sa buong mundo. So, the first effect is traditional challenges. When we say traditional challenges, it's regards to the external intervention that can be generally described as invasion by other countries. For example, yung si Saddam Hussein was a ruler of Iraq before in 1990. He decided he was going to take over the oil fields of Kuwait. He invaded Kuwait and took it over. As a result, he was dislodged by an international coalition led by United States. Ibig sabihin, itong traditional challenge, tinitingnan ito as effect of globalization, as globalization is an invasion. Nagkakaroon ng invasion between different system of government of different governments around the countries or around the different countries around the world. Next is challenges from nation and identity movement. So, another factor or another effect is the challenges from national identity movement. It is important to know that a nation has a cultural identity that people are attached to. While a state is a definite entity due to specific boundaries, however, different people with different identities can live in different states. For example, so with that essence, challenges from national identity and movements, ibig sabihin, through globalization, magkakaroon na ng cultural diversity, identity diversity, or mas marami na yung mag-i-emerge ng mga tao sa iba't ibang bansa. For example, the issues are magkakaroon ng cultural diversity, but yung pinakang national identity of a certain country is parang na-overwhelm kasi sa pagdami ng tao sa isang bansa coming from different nations, the identity was being overwhelmed. The national identity of a particular country is being overwhelmed. So, that is the major effects of globalization to government. So, another one is global economy or global economics. So, the global economy demands the state to conform to the rules of free market capitalism. Government austerity comes from developments of organizations that cooperate across the country. So, ibig sabihin, having globalization, as I've said in our previous lesson, malaki talaga ang impact ng globalization sa ekonomiya. So, kapag sinabi natin ekonomiya, andyan na yung hindi mawawala yung pangingialam ng government. Well, globalization itself is contradicting to that idea that globalization or the philosophies of globalization is more on free government intervention, but having a government doesn't mean that they are not going to intervene. So, globalization is very conflict in that aspects kasi if government wants to intervene, globalization will not be that smooth or will not be that effective or efficient. And lastly, we have the last effects of globalization to government is the global social movements. In the global social movements, andyan yung mga movements of people that are spontaneous or that emerge through enormous grassroots organization. These social movements kasi are transnational movement, which means they occur across countries and across borders. Therefore, states have less control over them and not seen as a threat but definitely a challenge to state sovereignty. For example, human rights movement create a public sentiment, value, and agenda. The idea that there are certain rights that state cannot neglect or generally what we call human rights. O, di ba? Itong Declaration of Human Rights or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, kasi itong government, meron silang mga rights or meron silang hindi nire-recognize na mga na rights ng mga tao. So, through globalizations, nagkakaroon ng maraming social movements or global social movements that is hindi lang sa iisang bansa but throughout the different countries around the world. So, in that case, it has a um, fully effects on the government and in the state as well, because if a country decide that they are going to have a particular policy and if that policy violates the international standard of human rights, there is a challenge to the ability of the state to fully implement it. So as I said before, na kapag itong mga global social movements ito as part of international organization, kapag hindi ito na implement ng maayos ng bawat state or bawat country, ibig sabihin hindi walang maayos na implementation. In that way, makikita natin yung epekto ng globalization sa bawat government or system of government ng bawat bansa. So, our lesson 7 will end with that. So, I hope you learned a lot on the global governments. As I said before, as the topic or the title of the topic is global governance, not global government, because as we see, there is no such thing as global government because there is no formal body that govern all the nations and all the countries around the world. But there are things such as global governance through the regulations provided by different international organizations. In that way, they are able to facilitate and regulate the activities, the policies, and the programs implemented by the different countries around the world. So with that, I hope you have gained a lot of knowledge and insights with our discussion, with our last discussion for Unit 2. I hope you really understand what is the essence of global governance in the implementation of globalization. So, with that, this is my reference and dyan ako kumukulat ng nilalagay ko sa aking presentation. With that, I want to thank you all and I hope you can answer all the learning activities well by using the ideas and informations that I shared for you. So, thank you very much and thank you for your time and thank you for listening.